Welcome and thank you for joining the Contemplative Citizen. It is March 29th, 2022, and we continue our exploration of the operative question: is it possible to build public will for governments to temper government overreach? Can they themselves act in a way that limits their own authorities? Today in this briefing alert, we can say absolutely yes. Idaho's Senate Bill 1381, the Coronavirus Pause Act, effectively ends discrimination and segregation based on vaccine status. This is totally opposite of what we talked about yesterday in California's portfolio of 10 bills that do just the opposite. Today we celebrate what is going on inside one of our state capitals. In Idaho, Senate Bill 1381, which I keep repeating because you should download this PDF, and if you don't know where to find it, contact the Contemplative Citizen. You can reach us at tcc@kmdr.net. We can forward this to you. But you can find it on legiscan.com, a great resource if you're looking for what's going on at the state level regarding, anything, all legislative activity. So you see what's on the docket and when it's going to get through. They call that the legislative agenda. All right, so what does it do and why are we celebrating it? Because it's the first time we see government acting to limit its own authority. Here, it forbids, as I said before, any business entity in the state shall not refuse to provide any service, product, admission to a venue, or transportation to a person because of that person's vaccination status, whether they have or have not received a coronavirus vaccination. It cannot be a term of employment, except in the rare case where you're required to travel internationally, in which case they defer to international laws or the laws of that country into which you're going. In such cases, maybe you do require a vaccine, and they acknowledge that a business of Idaho can hire persons to do that and to effectively do their job. They would have to have an active vaccine, acceptable vaccination status, and where federal law requires. Now, we have some comments about that. I would consider a weakness of this current legislative draft, but not necessarily a compromise. There might be very good reasons for that happening. Also, let's just focus on the good. It says that a ticket issuer, this is important. If you are a ticket holder, you cannot be denied access, discriminated against, charged extra, meaning penalized, for not having or having a coronavirus vaccine. And unless required by federal law, no state, county, or local government official, entity, or official in Idaho can require a person to receive a coronavirus vaccine. That means they can't tell you, for example, if you're part of the National Guard, to get a vaccine in Idaho. Now, important as well, there are some other things here that you cannot be discriminated against in terms of your salary or compensation package, your hourly wage, whatever it is that, The core compensation package for your employment cannot differentiate based on vaccination status, whether you have or have not had any series of coronavirus vaccines. And you cannot be forbidden entry into a venue. And it stipulates penalties for anyone violating this law. Now, one important feature, well, actually two more left. First is the severability clause. This law, and it's only several pages. It's, I think, 8 pages, 5 pages in total. Not a long bill. So it doesn't take a great deal of paper. You know, we keep hearing about laws introduced into the United States Congress that are 7,000 pages long. This is 4 pages. This law is 4 to 5 pages and severely limits the government and businesses' activities related to vaccine, let's call it vaccine discrimination, because that's what it is. It forbids that. So we want to applaud Idaho for passing this. It has a severability clause. That's important to prevent judicial activism. What do I mean by judicial activism? That means no one can look within these 4 pages and find a clause within the law, because it's going to be law now that it's sent to the governor on the 22nd and will be passed, signed into law shortly, or is thought to be signed into law. We, as the contemplative citizens, especially if you live in the state of Idaho, you should call the governor's office today and ask him to pen it, to sign that thing, get it into law right away. Why delay, right? Going back to the severability clause, it's important because of judicial activism, whereby you could cancel the whole law by finding a single clause that doesn't stand the scrutiny of judicial review. So it's important to have that in there. And most importantly, well, in this case, let's just say we want most laws to have a self-terminating clause. This bill, which will become law, has a self-terminating clause. It says 1 year on the anniversary when the emergency act of that state, like an emergency declaration related to COVID, is ended, 1 year after that, this law will cease to exist. Generally, we love the idea of laws having a self-termination clause because they tend to live forever. Here, this will live only 1 year after its effective period, right? If there's no coronavirus emergency, then there are no emergency powers and mandates that can be activated. But in this case, it ends it after a year. Now, if another, let's say there's an end to a pandemic declaration in Idaho, and then 6 months later, there is a stipulation that there's a new emergency arising, this law stays in effect. But if it goes 366 days, this law will terminate, and you have an emergency mandates can come back into play because this law may or, will not exist, and we don't know whether the legislative body or the governor will be in favor and will take up and reinforce or reenact this piece of legislation. So, in the cases where laws are limiting government authority, perhaps we do not need to insist on a self-termination clause. However, in general, they're good practice. Severability clause is important. And the other weakness that we need to talk about a little bit could be a compromise, could be something that could be exploited. However, it may be a necessary evil, not for the government, but for the people that rely on state block grants coming from the federal government, and that is the clause unless federal law requires. And oftentimes federal law that provides for these state grants, state block grants, where the state gets money to offer services to their citizens on behalf of the federal government, like Medicaid, Medicare, often have criteria by which people qualify for certain services or certain benefits. And in such cases, they could embed a vaccine passport, a vaccine mandate. They could, in fact, discriminate against providing services to the unvaccinated or the vaccinated. So there is that weakness in this bill. But politicians are not idealist. They're pragmatists, and so they may have weighted that their citizens require some of these government support services. So let's not hold it against them. But if we were to take this piece of legislation and move it elsewhere, perhaps we can find an advocate that says, hey, state rights trump federal regulation, and therefore we can withhold any discrimination or segregation based on vaccination status. By and large, though, Senate Bill 1381 of Idaho, a good bill, a good representation. Perhaps the People's Convoy who are on their way to California or have arrived in California can use this bill as an example when they're talking to state regulators as to what they would like to see. And perhaps even as an example of what could be done at the federal level, although we have other talking points related to why this should not be necessary at the federal level, simply because of the 10th Amendment, which states if it's not explicitly written in the Constitution, then that issue, that topic is deferred to the states or the citizens of that state, and therefore would be unnecessary at the federal level. But given current activities at the federal level and rule by committee rather than rule by law at the federal level, perhaps something like this needs to be explicitly passed. So that's another topic for another day. But let's take solace that one state, one legislative body has taken action, demonstrated the political will, that government can indeed temper its own desire to restrain itself. To overreach. So it's restraining their natural desire to overreach and hoard authority. So let's applaud Idaho legislature. Let's call the governor. Let's let them know we appreciate their activity. And if you have any more questions or bills to highlight, feel free to comment in our YouTube channel, The Contemplative Citizen, or write us an email at tcc@kmdr.net. And of course, we always thank you for tuning in to The Contemplative Citizen at your favorite podcasting stream.